Welcome back to Trade 360. Time now for our 360 round. For that, I want to bring in our panel to preview this week's earnings from the Mag 7. Joining us now is Christine Short of Wall Street Horizon, Head of Corporate Events Research, and Ivana Delevska, Founder and CIO of Spear Invest. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. Christine, let's start out with you. What's the overarching theme that you're expecting when it comes to the Mag 7? We've got 4 members this week. We've got Meta, we've got Microsoft, we've got Amazon, we've got Apple reporting this week. Are you expecting a show of strength or a moment of reckoning?
I think so. I mean, the year-over-year comparisons are pretty difficult for these names. Well, in the last several quarters, the Mag 7 have grown about, 20 to 30%. This quarter, they're expected about 14% growth versus the other 493 companies in the S&P 500, which are expecting about 3.5% growth. So still certainly the growth drivers here, but the season overall has kicked off on such a high note. And we've been waiting with bated breath for some of these big tech companies. They kicked it off last week. We had Tesla and Alphabet out. And I think Alphabet really set the tone for the names coming up this week. There's 3 points in the Alphabet report that I think bode very well for Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta in particular. And they're the 3 things that I'm going to be looking at for those companies to mention. One was cloud revenue. That's really what drove the top and bottom line beat for Alphabet last week. So, and you usually think of them as kind of the third tier behind Amazon's AWS and Microsoft's Azure. So expect to see good things in the cloud revenue announcements this week. Secondly, ad revenue, where, that's sort of been fluctuating, but that was a bright spot in the Google report. That will certainly bode well for Meta. And thirdly, you mentioned in your last segment, it's all about CapEx spending, right? And Google surprised us all when they announced CapEx spending guidance that was 10 billion higher, so up to 85 billion for 2025. And I think you're going to see some more of these companies this week follow suit.
Okay, Ivana, I caught you last week actually on, I think it was with Charles Payne. I'm curious to know, you've been paying attention to and noting this growing divergence among the Mag 7, and not all of them are created equal now. How much of it comes down to kind of how they're monetizing and their ability to monetize AI from your point of view?
Well, then I think you're spot on in that there's been a pretty significant divergence this year for the Mag 7, and it started as of about a little over a year ago. Basically, what's been going on is that AI is a big driver, and different companies have different ways of monetizing it. The Microsofts, the Amazons, and the Googles of the world, they make money by selling cloud services. So for them, it's all about how much CapEx they spend and what kind of returns on investments they're able to generate on that CapEx spend. So while we think these companies will continue to do well in the long run, we don't see necessarily an outsized performance just from their CapEx investments. We think they're going to have to invest insanely large amounts of capital in the next 2 to 3 years as we're hitting off this new wave of AI. Demand is going to be there, so I think the business will do well, but the returns on invested capital are really what we're watching closely.
Christine, I'm glad you brought up the CapEx point, because Alphabet, Google, with that announcement of plans to spend big there, that 85 billion number, caught the attention of many people, right, including us here at Schwab Network. But the stock this time around was not penalized for that, and it seems like that is justified, that kind of spending. Are you expecting to see the same kind of spending as it relates to Meta? And do you expect them to be the strongest positioning, or Meta and or Microsoft this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, Meta certainly from a consumer AI perspective, but yes, I do think that you're seeing this trend in CapEx. As Ivana said, it's not always in the long term. It might pay off in the short term. We've seen investors respond in different ways. There was one quarter where Microsoft upped their CapEx spending, and because of the short-term hit that they might take, investors weren't so pleased with that. But over the long term, of course, it is going to take money to set up the data centers and the related infrastructure to enable some and run some of these large language models that the likes of Meta, Microsoft, and Alphabet are looking to do. So that's certainly going to take that sort of large capital infusion. But certainly Microsoft on a consumer AI perspective, Meta and Amazon as well, which is reporting this week. And then Microsoft too, like I said, they've been leading on the CapEx front as well. So we'd expect to see some similar announcements from those names this week.
Ivana, I want to give the floor to you for the last word, especially as it relates to Apple. You've mentioned that Apple dropped the ball when it comes to AI. What does Apple need to say or show this quarter?
Well, then for Apple, it's really not so much about the earnings. The focus is really on how they're going to regain their lead in AI. So that's really the main thing that we're watching. So I would say out of the Magnificent Seven, I think that's the least one that it's about earnings and a lot more about their strategic positioning.
All right, we will leave our conversation there for today. That's Ivana Delevska and Christine Short. Thank you all so much for joining us and setting us up for a big week ahead with 4 members of the Mag 7 reporting this week.